Mother Teresa wrote, "If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other." In our everyday lives, we're faced with so many opportunities to separate ourselves from others, to say we are better, to say we are different, to say that we are above them. In our communities, in our schools, in the sports teams that we root for, we're put in so many positions where we are challenged to say it is us versus them. At school, we know who belongs to the in crowd and who's on the out. In our communities, we climb and clamor over one another, trying to outdo each other, trying to dominate, be the best. Except in this approach to life, we forget the basic understanding that we have all been created in the image of God. If we've all been created by God and loved by God, then we belong to each other. We don't belong to trying to outdo one another. In the first century, when Jesus was alive, there was two groups of people who absolutely despised each other: the Jewish people and the Samaritans. Historically, they had once been connected when the 12 tribes of Israel were all together in one kingdom. But eventually, the kingdom split into two, and then they were conquered, and the Jewish people were sent into exile. Some people were left alone in the territory that had been conquered. They had to wrestle with what their community looked like now. Years later, when the exiles were allowed to return, this new community had developed its own traditions. And the Jewish people that came back shunned them, would not accept them back, said they are no longer a part of us. In Jesus' day, this meant that socially they did everything to avoid one another. They weren't allowed to talk to each other. They would routinely walk around each other's territory just to avoid coming into contact. In Luke chapter 10, we find Jesus teaching to the crowds. And a lawyer stands up and he says, "Jesus, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus, being the master teacher that he was, doesn't answer the question right away, but flips it back to the lawyer and says, "Well, how do you read the law?" And the lawyer responds, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus says, "You have read it correctly." Trying to justify himself, then the lawyer speaks up one more time and says, "Well, Jesus, who is my neighbor?" Jesus launches into a story. A young man, a Jewish man, traveling from Jerusalem is headed down to Jericho. A trek that is dangerous, downhill all the way. Rocky paths and roads await him where robbers lie in wait. Sure enough, along the path, he gets mugged. He's beat up. He's left for dead on the side of the road. First man comes up, a priest, and instead of offering any help, just passes alongside on the other side of the road. Second man comes by, a Levite, another holy man, but treats him the same way. And then comes along a Samaritan, finds the young man beaten up, left for dead. He stops, interrupts his travels, tends to his wounds, brings him into town, and pays for him to stay in an inn, and promises to pay the bills that are necessary for his recovery. As Jesus concludes the story, he ends with, "So who was the neighbor?" And the young lawyer says, "The one who showed mercy on him." May we be people who show mercy to one another. People that remember that we belong to each other. And since we belong to each other, we will care and love and call forth the image of Christ in all people we come across. Mother Teresa has another quote that I want to leave you with today. She says, "The fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. And the fruit of love is service. The fruit of service is peace." Growing up, I would spend my mornings watching Mr. Rogers. And if you've watched any of the 2 films that have come out about him in the last year, you'd probably recognize his introductory song. He comes into his house and starts the show every day. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Go therefore and be neighbors to all you come across.